Story 1: The Locked Room. I never used to believe that a house could have a personality, or that a single door could radiate enough malice to make your skin crawl. But after what happened on Miller Street, I don't think I'll ever feel safe behind a closed door again. If you have a room in your house that you've never been able to open, or a part of your hallway that always feels a few degrees colder than the rest, do yourself a favor. Don't try to find out why. Some things are locked for a reason, and once you turn that key, you can't ever unturn it. It started 6 months ago when I moved into a suburban rental in a quiet part of Michigan. I'm a freelance editor, so I spend a lot of time alone, working from a desk in my bedroom. The house was a charm, or at least that's what the listing said. It was an old colonial with dark wood floors and a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that I initially mistook for character. My landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson who spoke in short, clipped sentences, gave me a tour but stopped abruptly at the end of the second-floor hallway. There was a door there, painted a dull, flat black. It had a heavy deadbolt that looked way too heavy for an interior door. Henderson just pointed at it and said it was for his personal storage. He told me the room was off-limits, and if I ever tampered with the lock, I'd be evicted on the spot. At first, I didn't care. I'm a private person anyway, and I had plenty of space. But after the first week, the noises started. It wasn't anything dramatic like screaming or banging. It was a subtle, rhythmic scratching, like someone was taking a fingernail and slowly dragging it along the other side of that black door. I tried to tell myself it was just mice or the house settling, but the sound was too deliberate. It would start at exactly 2:00 a.m. and stop at 4:00 a.m. every single night. I remember calling my friend Tyler about it. Tyler is the kind of guy who rationalizes everything. He told me I was just experiencing cabin fever from working at home too much. He came over one Friday night and we had a few drinks in the living room. I didn't tell him when it started, but right as the clock hit 2:00 a.m., the scratching began. Tyler stopped mid-sentence. He looked up at the ceiling toward the hallway. He asked me if I had a dog I hadn't told him about. When I told him no, his face went pale. He went upstairs and stood in front of that black door. The scratching was loud now. It sounded like someone was trying to dig their way through the wood. Tyler reached out to touch the handle, but before his fingers could even graze the metal, the scratching stopped instantly. It was replaced by a heavy, wet breathing. Someone was standing right on the other side of that door, their face inches from the wood, just listening to us. Tyler left 10 minutes later. He didn't even finish his beer. After that, the house felt different. It felt like the locked room was the heart of the building, and it was pumping something toxic through the vents. I started noticing small things. My kitchen chairs would be slightly pulled out in the morning. A damp, earthy smell began to linger in the hallway. Then, I found the first Polaroid. It was lying on the floor directly in front of the locked door. It was a photo of me sleeping in my bed. The angle was from the corner of my room near the ceiling. I live alone. I lock my bedroom door every night. I went into a panic. I checked the windows, the basement, the attic. Everything was secure. The only place I couldn't check was that room. I called Henderson, but his phone was disconnected. I searched his name online and found nothing but a series of dead ends. That's when I decided I was done. I went to the hardware store and bought a heavy-duty crowbar. I was going to open that door, see what was inside, and then I was leaving for good. It took me 20 minutes to break through that deadbolt. The wood groaned and splintered like it was screaming. When the door finally swung open, the smell hit me first. It was the scent of old copper and rotting lilies. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the thick, stagnant air. The room wasn't a storage space. It was a nursery, but it wasn't a normal one. The walls were covered in thousands of hand-drawn sketches. Every single one was of me. Me at the grocery store, me at the park, me sitting at my desk. In the center of the room was a small, wooden crib. I walked over to it, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it felt like it would break. Inside the crib wasn't a baby. It was a heap of my own clothes, stolen from the laundry, stitched together into the shape of a person. And pinned to the head of the doll was a handful of my own hair. I felt a cold breeze behind me. I turned around and saw a small hatch in the floor of the nursery, one I hadn't noticed before. It was open. A ladder led down into the dark space between the walls. I realized then that the scratching hadn't been someone trying to get out. It was someone moving through the house, watching me from the shadows behind the drywall. I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway behind me. I didn't look back. I jumped through the second-story window onto the overgrown lawn below. I didn't grab my keys, my wallet, or my laptop. I just ran. I spent the rest of the night in a 24-hour diner, shaking so hard I couldn't hold a coffee cup. When the sun came up, I went back with 2 local cops. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. The nursery was gone. The sketches, the doll, the furniture. It was just an empty, dusty room with white walls. There was no hatch in the floor. The cops looked at me like I was having a mental breakdown. Even the black paint on the door was gone. It was just a regular, unlocked wooden door leading to a small closet. I moved out that day. I left everything behind. I live in a modern apartment now, one with thin walls and lots of neighbors. I wanted to be around people. I wanted to hear the normal sounds of life. But last night I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching coming from the wall behind my headboard. And then a low, gravelly whisper that I recognized all too well. It said, "You really should have stayed in the nursery, Jason. It's much colder in the walls." Story 2, the basement camera. If you are listening to this in your basement right now, do yourself a favor. Turn around and look at the corner of the ceiling. Not the one you usually check, but the dark one behind the furnace, where the shadows seem a little too thick. I used to think my house was a sanctuary, a place where the world couldn't reach me. But I found out the hard way that sometimes the world isn't trying to get in. It's already inside, watching you through a lens you never noticed. My name is Tyler, and about 6 months ago, I moved into a small, single-story house in a quiet suburb of Naperville, Illinois. It was one of those older places with wood siding and a yard that had been neglected for years. The rent was suspiciously cheap, only $800 a month, which for that area is practically unheard of. My landlord, a guy named Mr. Vance, was an older man who always wore a heavy coat regardless of the weather. He was polite enough, but he had this habit of staring just past your shoulder whenever he talked to you. He told me he kept some old tools in a locked shed out back and asked that I stay out of it. I didn't care. I was just happy to have a place of my own. The house had a full basement that was partially finished. It became my man cave. I had my gaming rig down there, a small weight bench, and a couch I'd dragged in from a thrift store. Since I work a late shift data entry job from home, I'd spend most of my nights from 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. down there in the glow of my monitors. It was peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. But after the first month, I started feeling like I was being followed. Not outside on the street, but inside the house. I'd be sitting at my desk and feel a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind the furnace room door, staring at the back of my head. One Tuesday night, around 3:00 a.m., the power flickered. My PC shut down and the basement was plunged into total darkness. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic thumping of the furnace. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, and as the beam cut through the dark, the light caught something small and glass-like in the ceiling rafters. I stood up on my chair to get a better look. Tucked away in a knot of wood was a pinhole camera lens. It was so small that if the light hadn't hit it at just the right angle, I never would have seen it. My stomach did a slow roll. I grabbed a pair of pliers and ripped the rafters apart. Attached to the lens was a thin, black wire. It didn't lead to my Wi-Fi router or anything I own. I followed that wire across the ceiling behind the drywall and down toward the back of the basement where the foundation met the furnace room. I ended up pulling back a loose piece of wood paneling, and what I found made my breath hitch. Behind the wall was a narrow, hidden space, barely wide enough for a person to stand in. I squeezed inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the cramped, dusty space, there was an old, flickering CRT monitor sitting on a milk crate. It was hooked up to a DVR system that was humming quietly. On the screen, I saw 4 different angles of my house. One was the kitchen, one was my bedroom, one was the living room, and the 4th was the basement. I saw myself on the screen, or rather, I saw my empty chair where I had just been sitting. I started scrolling through the recorded footage, my hands shaking so much I could barely hit the buttons. There were hundreds of hours of video. I saw myself sleeping. I saw myself eating dinner. But then I found a folder titled Tonight. I clicked it. The footage showed me sitting at my desk gaming just 20 minutes ago. But in the video, someone was standing behind me. It was Mr. Vance. He was wearing that same heavy coat, standing perfectly still in the shadows behind my chair, just watching me work. He stayed there for 2 hours, and I never even knew. Then the power came back on. The monitor flickered and the live feed returned. I froze. The live feed of the basement showed me standing in the hidden crawlspace looking at the monitor, but it also showed the door to the hidden space, the one I just squeezed through. On the screen, I watched as the door slowly began to close. I lunged for the opening, but a heavy boot kicked the panel shut from the outside. I heard the sound of a metal bar being slid across the wood, locking me in. Panic erupted in my chest. I started screaming, throwing my weight against the wall, but it was solid. Then, I heard Mr. Vance's voice from the other side, muffled but clear. "You should have just stayed at your desk, Tyler," he whispered. "You were much more interesting when you didn't know I was here. Now, I have to find a new way to keep this house occupied." I spent 6 hours in that dark hole. I eventually found a rusted screwdriver on the floor and managed to pry the paneling open from the inside. When I broke out, the house was silent. Vance was gone. I ran out the front door and didn't stop until I found a cop car 3 blocks away. The police searched the house, but Vance had vanished. When they checked the shed out back, they found it wasn't a tool shed. It was filled with thousands of printed photos of the previous tenants, all taken from those same hidden angles. The guy before me had been missing for a year. The cops found his driver's license buried under the floorboards of that shed. I moved out that same day and stayed at a motel. I thought I was safe, but 2 nights ago I got an anonymous email. There was no text, just a link. When I clicked it, it opened a live video feed. It was a grainy, high-angle shot of a motel room. I saw myself sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone in horror. I looked up at the smoke detector on the ceiling, and as I did, the camera zoomed in on my face. The lesson I learned is that you can change your locks, you can move to a new city, and you can hide in a room full of people. But once someone decides that your life is their entertainment, you never really belong to yourself again. Somewhere, in a dark room I haven't found yet, the red light is still blinking. If you ever find a key in your house that you don't recognize, do not try to find the lock it fits. Seriously, just throw it away, melt it down, bury it. I don't care. I didn't do that, and now I don't think I'll ever feel safe behind a locked door again. It happened last month. I was house-sitting for my Uncle Bob in a quiet, older suburb outside of Chicago. It was an easy gig while he was on a business trip. Feed his ancient tabby cat, water the plants, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. I'd spent summers there as a kid, so I knew the house well. It was one of those split-level places built in the 70s. Lots of dark wood paneling and thick carpet. It was boring, normal stuff until Wednesday afternoon. I was watering a massive potted fern in the hallway when I tripped and knocked the whole thing over. Dirt went everywhere. While I was on my hands and knees scooping soil back into the pot, I saw something glinting near the roots. It was a key, but it wasn't a normal house key. It was heavy, made of dark, tarnished brass, with an intricate design on the bow that looked almost like a weeping face. It didn't look like anything Bob would own. He was a tech guy who used electronic keypads for everything. This thing felt old and weirdly warm to the touch. I should have just put it on the kitchen counter for Bob, but holding it gave me this strange, buzzing anxiety in my stomach. Curiosity got the better of me. I tried it on the front door deadbolt. It didn't fit. Tried the back door, the garage side door, even the padlock on the garden shed. Nothing. I felt stupid for spending 20 minutes running around trying this creepy key on everything. I went back inside to finish cleaning. That's when I noticed the door at the end of the downstairs hallway. It's a small door, about 3/4 height, that just leads to a crawl space under the main stairs. We used to hide in there playing hide and seek as kids. It always just had a simple, cheap slide latch. Except now it didn't. I stood there staring at it, the hair on my arm standing straight up. Instead of the cheap latch, there was a heavy, brand new looking deadbolt installed right in the center of the small door. It looked completely out of place. Why would Bob install high security on a dusty crawl space? My hand was shaking as I lifted the heavy brass key. It slid into the keyhole like it had been greased. Perfect fit. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but I turned it. The clack of the deadbolt disengaging sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I pulled the small door open. I expected dust, cobwebs, maybe some old holiday decorations. What I saw made my brain short-circuit. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a staircase leading down. This was impossible. I knew the layout of this house perfectly. The basement was on the other side of the foundation. This staircase was heading straight down into the earth where there should only be dirt under the living room floor. The steps were raw concrete, narrow and steep. A smell drifted up, stale air, metallic and rotten. I don't know why I went down. Maybe it was that horror movie logic where you just have to know. I used my phone flashlight, taking one step at a time. It went down about 20 feet and ended at a heavy steel door like something on a submarine. It wasn't locked. I pushed the steel door open and stepped inside. It was a perfect square room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor. In the corner was a stained mattress on the floor and a bucket that smelled awful. But the walls were the worst part. They were covered in Polaroids, hundreds of them taped directly to the concrete. I stepped closer, shining my light on them, and felt my knees buckle. They were photos of me. There was one of me sleeping on Bob's couch 2 nights ago, taken from the hallway darkness. Another of me eating cereal in the kitchen yesterday morning, taken from outside the window. Then I saw the older ones. Me as a 10-year-old playing video games in the living room. Me as a teenager mowing Bob's lawn. Someone hadn't just broken in recently. Someone had been living underneath my uncle's house for years, just watching me every time I visited. A noise came from behind me, from the top of the concrete stairs, back up in the hallway. It was the soft creak of a floorboard under weight. Panic seized me. I wasn't alone in the house. The person who lived down here was back. I slammed the steel door shut, plunging myself into near darkness, and fumbled with the deadbolt on the inside of the door. It clicked home just as I heard heavy footsteps thundering down the concrete stairs toward me. I spent 4 hours trapped in that stalker's nest, listening to someone pounding on the steel door and trying different keys in the lock, before I finally got cell service to call 911. When the police cut through the door, the other side of the stairs was empty. They never found who it was. My uncle swears he knew nothing about the room, that the crawl space had always just been a crawl space. I don't visit him anymore. I have my own apartment now on the top floor of a secure building. But sometimes, when it's really quiet late at night, I stare at my own front door deadbolt, terrified that I'll see it start to turn from the outside.